So hello everyone, you're very welcome to tonight's webinar titled Creating a Win-Win Scenario for Farmers and the Environment, where we'll have a look at some of the challenges and opportunities coming down the tracks towards Irish farmers with regard to nutrient use and how PastureBase Ireland can help them on this journey. So my name is Joseph Dunphy and I'm joined tonight once again by my Grass 10 colleague John Douglas and Micheal O'Leary, the coordinator of PastureBase Ireland. I'm also delighted to be joined by David Wall, the senior researcher from Teagasc, Johnstown Castle in County Wexford, and also dairy farmer Kevin Moran from County Mayo. Small little bit of housekeeping once again, just before we kick off. This webinar has been recorded again, and it'll be available on the Grass 10 page on the Teagasc public website under the webinars subheading in the coming days. And it'll be also available on the Teagasc Grass 10 Twitter and Facebook accounts in the coming days. Any questions, can you please put them into the box, the Q&A box in the bottom left-hand corner. We will endeavour to get to as many as we can tonight. So without further ado, David, we might get straight to you. You might set the scene for us in terms of where we are with in terms of the challenges coming down the tracks for Irish farmers, but also maybe some of the opportunities and maybe some of the low-hanging fruit to go after.
Thanks, Joseph. Hello to everybody on the group. As Joseph said, I'm going to kind of set out the scene to start off with in terms of where nutrients and nutrient use is going in terms of what the EU is looking at, and over time, those EU directives or regulations are bound to hit our shores and, I suppose, affect the way we farm, or the traditional way we farm in the past may not be the same as in the future. So without further ado, if we start off with nutrient use on farms, and where are the signs pointing over the next decade? This is really critical. That we engage with this stuff, that we understand what's coming as, I suppose, dairy farmers, advisors, and also in terms of the research to help the system overcome these new constraints. But in the new European Green Deal, many will have heard of this legislation, which is kind of in the ether in the melting pot at the moment. But under that Green Deal, the farm to fork strategy, which has been in the news and in the media, sets out some of the Commission's intention for the future out to 2030. So the first thing that you'll notice here in terms of the slide is what their intention is to reduce nutrient losses by 50%. So that's the first thing. So how we reduce those nutrient losses will be picked up if we can achieve that in the EPA's National Water Quality Monitoring story in terms of our rivers, lakes and estuaries. And what the Commission has kind of put forward is that we will need to reduce fertilisers by at least 20% by 2030. Now, that's a fairly tall order, 20% by 2030. It's bound to affect farming businesses in terms of being able to grow grass for you guys and ladies and gentlemen, and in terms of feeding the cows on the farm, can it be done? So that's a challenge that I would put back to you. If in 2022 you were told that you had to do with 20% less nitrogen fertilizer, for instance, have you a plan in place? Are you ready for that new era? And what can be done, I suppose, in terms of the farm, and in terms of increasing efficiency, getting that 20% back in terms of improving efficiency of the fertilizers, slurries, etc. that you're using on the farm? And can you still move forward as business as usual in terms of feeding the same amount of stock on the farm under these new constraints? The reason why this is coming forth is to do with air, soil and water pollution. And I suppose the new one that has consumed the media in the last wee while is the climate impact, so greenhouse gases. Coming down the tracks and going to be really front and center is biodiversity. and enhancing biodiversity in terms of marketability of milk and food is going to be critical. But also then in terms of the environmental lobby are very focused on the loss of biodiversity across Europe. We're in a fairly good status in Ireland, but it's important that we maintain what we have or enhance it going forward. So these are the challenges, and I suppose the rest of this webinar or this event this evening, we'll try to, I suppose, provide some information for you to overcome this. The first question that I've posed here is, how can we increase the efficiency of fertilizers? As I've said, if we were to do with 20% less, what could we do? And the first thing that we need to look at is, what are the sources of N available to grow the grass? So what I'm showing here is annual grass growth or annual grass yield in tons on the y-axis, and along the bottom is the different supplies. So the first one there is soil N supply. On many farms, it varies from different soil types, different fields, depending on how long they're in grassland. But a good average nitrogen, soil nitrogen supply is somewhere between 100 and 130 kilos of soil nitrogen supply. And that will grow in the region of 5 to 6 tons of grass on its own. If we think about the stocking rate on the farm, what's the stocking rate doing? The cows on the grazing platform, they're consuming the grass and they're recycling most of the nitrogen that goes through them in the grass. So the protein in the grass, etc., that's all nitrogen, and that comes out the back end as excretion. And that, if we put a stocking rate of 210, a irrigation stocking rate on top of the 100, we're up to 300 kilos of nitrogen. And then we think about the last part of the puzzle is the fertilizer. And this is just topping up what nitrogen is already in the system. And it's the one piece of the puzzle that we can control in terms of when and where we go with the nitrogen fertilizer spreader and how much we put out at the different times over the year. And this is where PastureBase can be leveraged. The information in PastureBase can be fully leveraged to help you make these decisions and help you utilize the nitrogen where it's best needed. So if you think about the fields on your farm, the different growth rates on your farm, go back and review your PastureBase figures for the last number of years. Not every field is growing the same amount. One soil does not fit all in terms of its potential. So not all fields will grow the heady height of 15, 16, 17 tons. And nor should the amount of fertilizer then correspond by putting out a blanket amount equal on each paddock. So this is where I suppose efficiency is at its best. Where can we throttle back a little bit and where can we drive on a little bit more? If we look at the relative fertilizer use efficiency here, what's the benefit of building soil fertility? You'll have many places on the farm which will be optimum soil fertility, but there's other places like outside blocks, like silage areas that may not be optimum soil fertility. And what effect is that having on the fertilizer N we use? Here I looked at a number of studies where we looked at the inefficiency, N-use efficiency in corresponding to the different soil indices. So at index 3, which is our target index, we get maximum efficiency across the paddocks or the fields on the farm. However, if we're operating on fields with low efficiency, so index 1 there, very low, and low in terms of phosphorus, index 2, we can surmise that up to 15% of the N that you put out in the bagged fertilizer or with the slurry tanker is potentially wasted. So it's money that you've purchased fertilizer with, and it's not being utilized. So it's not a good return on investment. So first and foremost, we need to think about lime, P and K, do your soil testing. If you haven't done it this spring, many year derogation, you'll have those for the derogation plan. Why spend this money to get soils tested, to put a report into the Department of Agriculture to get your derogation? Why not use this information yourselves as farmers? It's not for the Department of Agriculture per se, it's for you to use first and foremost. In terms of reducing nitrogen loss, if we think about the slurry, that's a huge resource there on the farm. You don't have to purchase it. It's in your tanks over the winter. How can we use that better? First and foremost, by targeting the fields with low P and K, because there's a lot of P and K in slurry. But the next thing is, by using low emission slurry spreading, we can save a lot in terms of nitrogen. So if we think about when that nitrogen is lost, if we look at the ammonia loss or nitrogen loss on the y-axis here, and the percentage loss, and then the time after application along the x-axis, you can see here that with a splash plate, we're losing probably 40–45% of the total ammoniacal nitrogen. The nitrogen in the slurry there is lost to the air immediately after spreading. This is happening within hours after you spread the slurry. However, if we were to move to the latest technology, a trail and shoe or a low emission slurry spreading, you can see there we immediately cut that emission or that nitrogen loss in half, if not more. Again, this is a simple technology. Yes, it takes a little bit of planning. If you don't have that technology on the farm yourself, you'll have to get your contractor to utilize it, but it allows a lot of flexibility in terms of going into heavier swards, being able to get graze outs after putting out slurry on regrowths, etc. So it's a good technology. It does what it says on the tin. It reduces the nitrogen loss, and hence we can save in terms of fertilizer going forward. If we were to put this information into how much NP and K is in 1,000 gallons of cattle slurry, so if you think about 1,000 gallons of cattle slurry, how much is that equivalent to in terms of a bag of fertilizer? For a splash plate, it's equivalent to a bag of 5,532, right? That's worth about €23. For a trail and shoe or a low emission slurry spreading method, that 5 units of N is increased to 9 units. So it's a 9,532 equivalent. So for 3,000 gallons slurry application, you're getting 15 units with the splash plate, and you're getting the equivalent of a bag of can. You're getting 27 units going out with the same 3,000 gallons by using low emission slurry spreading. So again, it's an immediate saving, and it makes you more resilient for the changes that may come in regulation in future. Next, please. Okay, final piece of the puzzle. If we think about then putting these pieces of the puzzle together in terms of using PastureBase to assess the different growth rates and the different potentials of the paddocks on your farm, what are we going to do in spring? Number one. So how early should we go? This will be information that you can look into the PastureBase figures and find out, you know, how much did I grow last year in these fields? Review your historic figures. Soil type is very important here. Most farms will have some heavier or wetter soils compared with your dry soils. Those dry soils are going to warm up earlier because there's not water in there. The air temperature can get in to those soils and heat them up quicker, and hence they're going to respond quicker to early nutrients. Whereas your heavy soils that are poorly drained in the red line there, they're going to stay at low growth rates for longer. And the question has to be asked is, do I need to blanket spread therefore the whole farm with nutrients at this time of the year in the next couple of weeks? Or am I going to hold off on a proportion of the farm till those soils begin to warm up and dry out? And again, there's savings to be made there. It makes good economic sense. It doesn't affect your agronomy in terms of growing grass, and you get the added environmental benefit there. So again, is it slurry? Is it protected urea in the first round? Where are you going to go? The next round there, well timed in the March area. If you have low fertility, you need to get a compound or a slurry on some of those paddocks with low fertility to drive the peak growth. And then as you get out into the summer, part 2 and part 3 of the season there, we need to think about, do we need to give the soil a helping hand? Do we need to plug in some compound if there's an allowance on the farm to drive that peak growth a little bit higher every day? And that's dependent on looking at your soil fertility. If you're on index 1 and 2 soils, yes, you do need something in there to drive peak growth. If you're on index 3 soils, or certainly on index 4, you can go with a nitrogen only round, and that can be protected urea which gives you the added benefit of producing the same or equivalent grass to can, but you get lower emissions, and Ireland Inc. Gets credit for that. The other things to think about there are lime. We need to be opportunistic on a dairy farm, probably not many opportunities in the spring, but as the grazing rotation opens out and the silage blocks come back into the grazing platform, there is opportunities there to apply lime and get that right. That's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Sulfur needs to be thought about there in terms of paddocks that are regularly baled, and then build up. We tend to build up in terms of phosphorus in early part of the year. That's where it's needed. Whereas potash, we can think about that from July onwards without any threat in terms of grass tetany, etc. Next one. Finally then, and I'll leave you with these thoughts. So in terms of the early season fertiliser nitrogen application, these are some of the pasture-based figures, and you'll have these for your own farm. These are average figures. Average figures don't suit anybody. They're not correct for anybody, but they give you an idea of what I'm going to say here. So if you think about the 5-year average, the blue line there, you can see there that growth rates start off reasonably slow, and then they begin to increase roughly in or around Paddy's Day or a little bit earlier on earlier ground. So the first thing that we need to think about is, what early nitrogen or slurry do we put out, and when do we put it out? So if growth rates and soil temperatures are low, if soil temperatures are below 5.5 degrees, the grass is not going to be growing that strong. So again, you need to pick the fields on your farm, pick the swards on your farm, and decide, where am I going to go with the fertiliser spreader, and also where am I going to go with some early slurry. And the rest of the farm then, you can hold off and leave it till it warms up or it begins to respond. So that's your first round. Roughly 25, 30 units, depending on your ground, is enough. We don't need any more out there, because if we have nitrogen out there hanging around that won't be used for a 4 to 6 week period, why have it out there when it's raining, it's cold, and it's potentially lost? So keep it, horses for courses, keep it between the ditches in terms of your first application rate and timing. The next one then is, as I've said before, on low fertility soils, we need to have either a well-timed compound or around a slurry there, right before the onset of peak growth. And the reason why is soils are cold and damp, and they need phosphorus for energy. The energy in the phosphorus drives the peak growth. So you can put in as much, if I use the analogy of a tractor engine, you can put in as much diesel as you want. If you don't have engine oil, if you don't have the P, the K, the lime, the diesel is not going to be utilized very well. And eventually the system will seize or give up on you. So again, we need to prime the system. We need to put in that, akin to that engine oil, the P, the K, the lime into the system. Early, it needs to be phosphorus. Later on, it needs to be potash. So a well-timed compound on those soils. It doesn't have to be too early, but in or around Paddy's Day is a perfect timing to get that on. So I'll leave you with that thought, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Perfect, David. Thanks a million for that. There was a lot of information gone through there. I suppose a couple of key points there, David, just from the earlier part of the discussion, that's going to be really relevant is that, soil fertility, if it wasn't extremely important over the last number of years, with going forward with reduced nitrogen, it's going to be critical. And I suppose, using LESS, low emission slurry spreading, we're getting a double barrel effect. We're going to make better use of the slurry that's on the farm, and also also making, having lower emissions from it. So there are two key points there. Micheal, have you any?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in there, I suppose, David. Friday, the first one that came in there. Have you any comments on slurry inoculants to improve slurry efficiency and to build soil organic matter? Any comments on soil?
Yeah, look at there's a lot of slurry inoculants out there. it's a space becoming a little bit like silage preservatives were in the past, back in the 80s. We're looking and evaluating many of these inoculants currently at the moment. And all I would say is buyer beware in a little bit. There is some good stuff out there, but you need to look for and ask your advisor in terms of some information, in terms of what you're being sold. So all I would say is tread with caution. There is some good stuff. There's different types of inoculants there in terms of ones that reduce the agitation potential. Those are less likely to maintain more nitrogen in the slurry compared with some of the others. And the reason being is that crust that you have on the slurry actually protects it from nitrogen emissions. So it's a little bit of a conundrum, because guys like the nimbleness of being able to spread and not having to agitate as much. However, that crust is actually a benefit in terms of saving more nitrogen. So all I'd say is contact your advisor. There is advice out there. If your advisor doesn't know firsthand, he'll know where to get some information in terms of what research is being conducted.
And we just might take one other quick one as well. Is David, you showed a slide there with soil that was suboptimal, and there was a reduction of 15% in nitrogen efficiency.
Yes.
The question is just where does that nitrogen go, that 15%?
Okay, so in terms of that graph and that 15% reduction in nitrogen use efficiency, if it's not uptaken by the plant because the plant doesn't have enough energy or is limited by some other nutrient, by putting on more nitrogen, you're actually making the system worse and more leaky. In terms of where that nitrogen goes, first and foremost, it's going to be there in the ground. So you'll pick it up on the next round. However, if you're not measuring, so this group is measuring, so you have the benefit of that. And by putting on the next round, then it becomes even more inefficient if there's 15% left over. On the shoulders of the year, that nitrogen becomes really risky, because once you get to probably mid-March into April, there's very little losses. The ground is dry, the rainfall is not as much, and the grass is growing strong. However, up to that point, if you have surplus nitrogen hanging around, it's potentially going up as a greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide, or it's being leached out in free draining ground down into the groundwater. We'll say if you're going with 8 rounds of nitrogen, for instance, just take an example, and if there's 15% not being used every round, by the time you get to September, now you have a big bank of nitrogen left in the soil. Once we get to November, the rainfall increases enough that leaching begins to start, and that nitrogen, if it's not utilized by then, gets flushed out of the system, so you lose it. And this is kind of, I suppose, ye as a group have a better chance of gauging this on the different parts of your farms. You have soil tests if you're in derogation. If you're not in derogation, I would say to you, please get soil tests. It's the best spend that you can get. And the next thing then, as the lads are going to talk about now, is use your information. You're measuring, you're using that for budgeting, but you can also use it to tailor your nutrients and get the best bang for your buck.
Yeah.
That's the question without too much confusion.
Thanks, David. I suppose there's a lot of questions after coming in there, David, in your presentation, but I suppose we better move on and just to tell everyone, I suppose, keep the questions coming in and we will come back to them, and be it later on in the webinar or tomorrow. Over to you, Joe.
All right.
Perfect, John. Go on ahead there, yeah.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, you're still on the line there, Kevin?
Yeah.
Man. So, Kevin, you've joined us, and thanks very much for joining us and taking your time and to share your farm information. We're very grateful. Do you mind, I suppose, Kevin, just straight into it, give us a bit of background to yourself when you start farming and things like that, and what the farm system you're running?
Yeah, thanks very much, John. And thanks, Davis and Joseph. Very informative start there. There's a lot of information in there, Dave. So fair play. It's great to see the science is there, and it's backing us up. So I suppose to answer your question, John, by way of introduction, I'm farming up here in County Galway from Mayo, so controversial enough. I have to apologise actually because my internet started giving me trouble there just as we started the call. So it seems we can grow the grass up west, but we can't seem to get fibre broadband. So my apologies if I do run into issues. So I'm milking in Carlastrand. It started off as a leased operation, John. So I secured a 10-year lease on a block of land, and that was in 2013. And so it's grown from that. I've leased 2 of the neighbouring farms and bought one and put together a decent block. So I suppose in a 30-second summary, you've gone from 72 cows on 90 odd acres to 260 cows on 230 acres of a milking platform with a 35 acre support block.
Okay. Yeah, and you just say growing a lot of grass. Getting I suppose there's on your pasture base as well, Kevin, there's a good bit of silage ground, so that's sort of probably a reason why the grazing isn't maybe as high as others, and there's a lot of silage tonnage on it, so that's accounting for that. You just want to comment on your pre-grazing yield, Kevin? I know you were talking about that before. There's something you were looking at the moment.
Yeah, so I suppose look at the emphasis here is from day one has always been on cows and grass. And I suppose, in recent years, we've started to focus on nitrogen use efficiency. And so when I look at that graph there that everyone can see, pre-grazing yield of 1,600 and number of grazings per paddock of an average of 7.2, I think there's really, that jumps out at me as room to improve. And that's definitely something I'm going to target this year and look at trying to get more grazings at maybe 1,400. And get numbers of grazings up to 8.5. And I suppose by doing that, John, I'm going to sell more kilos of solids because they'll have a higher protein, they'll milk better on it with the same level of inputs. And so by default, I'll increase my nitrogen use efficiency if I can get that pre-grazing yield down to 1,300 and get the number of grazings up.
Yeah, and yes, so just to suppose reiterate the point, you're doing a lot of walking on PastureBase, and you've been doing it for a number of years, like over 40 walks. Like, do you want to maybe, or maybe we move on to it with the soil fertility, the pie charts here, Kevin, we'll touch on it here. Do you just want to give us the story here? What, like, this is 2014 versus last year versus 2020. So your farm, you're basically, you flipped it around. You are basically, a third of the farm was in optimum for soil fertility about 5 or 6 years ago, and now basically 2/3 of it is optimum, and only a third of it is suboptimum. And you are growing 13.4 tons in 2014, and that increased then to last year to 15.8 tons. So you've grown nearly an extra 2.5 tons over the last 5 or 6 years across the farm, which is, I suppose, is huge, in terms of the amount of stock you can carry and things like that. So do you want to just comment, I suppose, Kevin, like, how did you go about this?
Yeah, so I suppose the thing about it is, John, I found you make up ground and you'll achieve, and I'll tell you in a minute how I managed to achieve some of it, and obviously there's still a lot of work to do. But then, as the farm maybe beside me came up and I leased it, all of a sudden that if that farm is down at index 1 and 2, your percentages was like going back to square one again and starting. So it is a work in progress. But look, I suppose to answer your question, we sort of flipped that chart, if you like. So we've got up to 67% optimum of soil samples are optimum. And I suppose that in it, as I say there, the soil sampling. So every single year, John, soil sample every paddock. And I suppose all decisions are based off that. And as David alluded to earlier on, having the soil samples and making informed decisions strategically from that has been central. I try to apply P in spring and try to apply K in autumn, is typically sort of what I aim to do. But you're always working off them soil samples, and you're making use of your P and your K, and you're being strategic with it. But I suppose number one. So
you have a plan every year for the farm, do you, in terms of what each paddock is going to get, Kevin, or what? How do you know, what to say, how you going about it? Because obviously it's grand to talk about it here tonight, and obviously you've done the work, you can see it there, and the proof is in the pudding. But how does a farmer go through, in the middle of the year, what should he be spreading on each paddock, it might be hard to see it. So did you have a plan in place at the start of each year?
Correct, exactly. So it's a two-pronged approach, John. I think first prong is having that plan. So knowing how many kgs of P and K an index 1 soil needs to get up, how many kgs of P and K an index 3 soil needs to maintain where it's at. And I suppose the second prong in that, John, is ongoing recording. So, you know, it's very easy to you know, try and keep track of it, but through the PastureBase app, just keeping track of slurry and fertilizer applications, you can then mid-season you can assess and go into that, and you can see how much each paddock has got. You can reference that to the soil samples, and it's almost like a bank balance. You're just trying to zero it. You're trying to get it to match it off to get it where it needs to be, you know.
Yeah. So you've actually answered my sort of second question, which was how does PastureBase help in this? And as you said there, you're able to record information, you're able to look back on it, and I suppose look at maybe the end of year reports and things like that as well, Kevin, are you?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose on top of the soil fertility, you know, that extra 2.5 ton hasn't just come from soil fertility alone. You've also been doing, I suppose, your reseeding as well, Kevin, aren't you?
Yeah, so I suppose since 2013, 3/4 of the farm has been reseeded. So I suppose, like as David was saying earlier on, like just nitrogen is almost the fine tuning, if you like. You know, it's the last 20%. The first 80% is all about, I suppose, what varieties you have in there, your perennial ryegrass content, your pH, your P, your K. That's really the foundation that everything is built on, and the chemical nitrogen is almost your last 20%, I found. And also I think, you know, my mindset in 2014 versus my mindset now is that I'm placing an awful lot more value on slurry and the use of it, I suppose, you know, in terms of achieving that extra 2.5 ton, which, like, you know, as you alluded to, it's an extra half cow a hectare that you're able to carry. And if we're doing 800 or 900 euros profit a cow, it's an extra 450 euros profit per hectare in the year, like, which is massive.
Yeah, and that comes back to, you know, every ton utilized on a dairy farm is 173 euro, and on a dry stock farm is 105 euro. So that's, you know, every ton utilized per hectare. Yeah. So, and I suppose Micheal will go through how you input the soil test reports or soil test results onto PastureBase and Fertiliser, and he'll go through that after our talk. So Kevin, you're still looking at, and I suppose probably should have said at the start there, you know, the year gone out from PastureBase, you have 240 kilos of chemical nitrogen spread on the farm, and are you hoping to try and reduce this?
Yeah, so I suppose for 2021, John, I've set myself a target of reducing that by 10%. I'd see it as really, you know, it's very achievable. So the last couple of years, through reseeds and through stitching in, we've tried to incorporate clover into the milking platform as much as possible. We've achieved, there's almost about 25% of the platform, John, that would have a high clover content. So I suppose in terms of achieving that goal that I've set for 2021 of a 10% reduction of nitrogen, again, it's a two-pronged approach. And I suppose maybe the next slide might show it, but it's about,
yeah, we go through it now.
Yeah. So I suppose using clover and applying less nitrogen on the clover swarts, and there'll be more information on that, I think, in the next slide. And also mid-season, using less nitrogen mid-season, John. So this slide here.
Go, you work away, Kevin. Yeah, you know the score.
Yeah. So this slide here is basically, there's a plan there in place for spring in terms of fertilizer plan. So we've done a farm cover there last week, and it's shown that, so all those paddocks, as you can see there in the graph, that are under 800 will get 2,500 gallons of slurry, and the rest of them will get about, the other 66% of the farm will get a half bag of protected urea. And again, then in March, there'll be another split application where the first third, sorry, John, you were going to come in?
No, work away.
So the third that I'll aim to have a third of the farm grazed by the 1st of March, and that third will get 2,500 gallons of slurry. The other 66% of the farm will get a bag of urea, and the third that I put slurry on in March that will have been grazed will be topped up with protected urea as well 10 days later.
Yeah. So the big thing here is that you're using the slurry. Obviously, try to get as much of it out in the springtime, replacing the chemical fertilizer that you I suppose traditionally spread with that slurry, and that slurry is also being spread through LESS, which is the low emission slurry spreading. So that's where the saving has come, and figures that were done. This is coming from Deirdre Hennessy's, that using less will save 15 kilos of nitrogen per hectare on the milking platform if we can get it out in the springtime. So, and Kevin, you've been doing this now for the past couple of years anyway, so we're not including this in your saving, in your 10% reduction. You're already doing this, but we just wanted to highlight it. And I suppose the fact there that wedge that you did, Kevin, was done there on Monday. So, even in terms of before the slurry goes out, folks, you want to be sort of getting a walk done and being able to have a look at your wedge like that and saying, okay, they're the paddocks on the right hand side. They're the ones that I'm going into now with the slurry, and it's very easy to see them and pick them out there. So, I suppose Joe, to flick up, yeah. So, and I suppose the big thing here is if we are using LESS, there's no point using it and saying that the rest of the chemical fertilizer will reduce itself. We have to proactively reduce the fertilizer, then the chemical fertilizer that we apply. And then, so if we're using LESS, we should be spending less on fertilizer. So again, we're saving money. So it's a win for the farmer and a win for the environment in this case. So thanks, Joe. So I suppose the second one, Kevin, you talked about the last couple of years maybe as well. You were probably maybe a little bit heavy in the mid-season on the fertilizer, and this is something you're trying to reduce back a little bit.
Yeah, exactly, John. So I suppose I'll be on the 25% of the farm that is a high clover content. I'll be targeting about 170 to 180 kgs of chemical nitrogen on that area of the farm over the whole year. And that's
we'll have a look at that in the minute anyway. We'll have a look at it there. We have a slide. And on the remainder of the farm that does have clover on it, Kevin, you're I suppose just cutting back maybe from about 25 units to about 20 units during the summer period.
Using a unit a day is a rule of thumb, John,
Yeah.
And again, so about 20 units, because without a doubt, it's an easy saving,
Yeah, so to keep it simple for people, about a unit a day from, we'll say, the 1st of May on through till early August. So if you're on a 20-day rotation, well, then you apply 20 units of nitrogen, and of course in the form of protected urea. So, for some farms are spreading maybe 25, 30 units over a 20-day rotation. The grass sward doesn't need that. It does. You're applying too much, and we can cut it back and make a saving here. And just for Kevin's situation here, we said if we did 5 rotations from early May till early August, we're saving about 6 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. That's 30 kilos per hectare. Now, not all his ground on PastureBase that's recorded is going to be grazing ground. So we put that as an average of about 15 kilos of nitrogen per hectare saved across the farm over that. So there's 15 of his 24 kilos needed to save. There's 15 coming, I suppose, from just being more clever with it in the mid-season. Thanks, Joe.
Perfect. Just one other thing there, John. Just on if anyone had read the Grass 10 newsletter this week, we had a bit of an article in it there from Anya Murray in Teagasc Moor Park, where she's been doing some work on protected urea over the last 2 years over 4 sites, comparing protected urea to CAN and conventional urea in terms of grass growth. I suppose just to get some data there in terms of how much grass has been grown on a trial basis, like in plots. And as you can see there on the right hand side of the screen there, there's been over the 4 plots over the 2 years, there's been pretty much no difference in grass growth. So the protected urea is doing the business, and they have seen no other issues come up across those farms, across the four trials over the last number of years. And also just in terms of the fact of it being protected urea being, cost effective nitrogen, we look at some of the costings there from last year. The urea, the protected nitrogen was working out about 80 cents a kilo, and CAN was working out somewhere around 93 cents per kilo of N. So I suppose both it being cost effective and the advantages from an environmental point of view in terms of the lower nitrous oxide and lower ammonia emissions compared to urea. We really should, as farmers, we should be looking at protected urea as our fertilizer of choice for 2021. So we'll keep moving there.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
Yeah. So just on to clover, Kevin. Now you can. So sorry, I interrupted you last time. You can tell your story on the clover there, Kevin.
Yeah. So as I was saying, John, we through reseeds over the last few years, and also through stitching in clover with the 9-buck last April. There's about 25% of the farm that would have a high clover content. So from April onwards, we'll be going half rate on that, and that should achieve year-in figure of about 170 or 180 kgs of nitrogen on that. So saving of about 60 kgs on those hectares. Now, granted, it's only a quarter of the farm, but over the whole farm, that should end up saving about 15 kgs. So that with the reduction mid-season on the normal sorts without clover of 6 or 10 should give me that saving of 20, about 10%, 24 to 30 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, as we've set out.
Yeah, we could be being a bit conservative with the maybe chemical fertilizer we might save on the clover swards there. So 10% is the target, and if you beat it, no one's gonna, you're going to be up money in your pocket, Kevin, because it's obviously less fertilizer, and obviously more clover means more mixed solids for you as well. And there's also, I suppose, the saving from the mid-season as well on top of that. So you're on the environmental benefits of that as well. It's going to be even better. So I suppose that's just to highlight the different strategies. I suppose, Kevin, you're going to have this year for reducing your nitrogen and I suppose input in terms of chemical fertilizer and increasing your nitrogen use efficiency. And I suppose then we probably skimmed over a little bit, but you've done 40 walks on PastureBase. I suppose that allows you to see how your farm is growing and meet the need of the farm mid-season. So you have a lot of opportunities. If you're walking the farm maybe twice a week during the summertime, Kevin, you've two times every week or 2 chances every week where you can decide, if you can reduce fertilizer a bit more, or you need a little bit more. So you're a bit more flexible that way as well. And you've moved sort of from blanket spread in the summertime. You're going to go a bit more often now as well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So it'll be more so following the cows around midsummer, John. And just in terms of the number of walks, I suppose if I'm to reduce the average pre-grazing yield from 1,600 down to 1,300 and increase the number of grazings, 40 plus walks will be a really important part of achieving that. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, no, so thanks very much, Kevin. Micheal is just probably going to get ready there to show us, I suppose, how you go about putting in your soil tests and how you go about recording fertilizer and that now in a second. But just to, I suppose, to make PastureBase work for anyone watching, it's all about getting going, getting set up. Obviously, most people on here watching are probably have done a certain level of measuring over the last couple of years, so they have an idea what their paddocks or what their farm is growing. And now it's time to take the next step to see how efficient can we get it with fertilizer. So recording fertilizer applications is the first step. So you can do that on your paddock. On each paddock, each time you apply your fertilizer, you're inputting your soil test results as well. At the start of the year. So if you have any, Micheal will show you how to put them in. You can set up the link or put them in manually. Very simple. You review your grass grown per paddock, so you can obviously look at your annual tonnage report. You can look at your soil test report at the end of the year and see how they're all linking up with the soil fertility, the fertilizer applied, and what's coming out at the other end in terms of grass growth. Then you can record the lime through the fertilizer. You can record lime as well. And as Kevin said, with his plan, he strategically allocates his P and K to the paddocks that need it most, to increase those indexes and make sure he's getting the best response for his nitrogen fertilizer. You can also record the reseeding through PastureBase. And looking at your annual tonnage, you can see the paddocks that are underperforming, and that, you know, even though the soil fertility is being fixed, maybe requires more reseeding. So I suppose a couple of other ways, just I suppose looking at the annual tonnage, you know, if you have a lot of bales taken off your annual tonnage, that's obviously pulling nitrogen out of the system. And maybe if you don't need the bales, you know, if you need 1 or 2 bales per cow and you're getting 3 or 4, maybe there's opportunities there to pull back fertilizer at certain times during the summertime, maybe when some of the first cut silage ground has come back in for grazing. And also, I suppose Robin, what the dairy farmers about feeding to yield, they're sort of saying that they usually feed the cow depending on how much she milks. Well, we're sort of having to get to the stage like that we alter what we put on the paddock depending on what it can grow, because some paddocks obviously just can't grow, you know, the 14 ton, maybe they're stuck at 12, and that's as good as they're going to get. So, you know, if a paddock's growing 12 ton, well, then you can automatically probably reduce that back to, you know, from 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare back to 200, because that's sort of roughly what it requires for the year. So it's just those savings, and that's how PastureBase, I suppose, ties into that. So sorry, Micheal.
Yeah, thanks, John, and I suppose good night, everyone. Great to see so many people logging in again tonight. So as John outlined, I suppose I'll be going through a few tools in PastureBase, and we'll be mainly focusing on fertilizer. So I'm just logged in here to a demonstration farm, and we're just on the landing page, and you can see the fertilizer option here. So as you put in your fertilizer during the year, the total NP and K and sulfur kilos per hectare will start to accumulate here, and the year-to-date figures will populate there. So to move on to entering fertilizer, so you can see our left-hand menu here, fertilizer / slurry. If we go in here to add new, and we'll add in a couple of records. So up the top left-hand corner here, you have your list of paddocks, all down along. If you're spreading a couple of paddocks, maybe this time of the year, you might be doing a blanket spread, or you might be doing up to a third or maybe 2/3 of your paddocks or of your farm. You can select them down along the list. So I have 2 selected. Total area of those 2 paddocks is over 3 hectares. And for this one here, we'll go down and we'll select protected urea. So I suppose there is a lot of different fertilizer types. So if we go down here to protected urea, and I suppose we can change the date. So if for example you were backdating maybe some stuff maybe during the summer or whatever, maybe didn't have time to put in the records when you were spreading, the date can be changed. This middle box here, I suppose we do get a lot of questions from time to time from farmers about the different options. And the most important part here, I suppose, is that we've total amount per acre, amount per hectare, and units of nitrogen per acre. So I suppose there's 4 different ways of putting in the fertilizer. Anything with the amount means the actual physical amount of product, usually in kilos. So for example, if we were going to spread a 1/2 ton bag of, we'll say, protected urea, and we covered the 2 paddocks and there was nothing left in the fertilizer, we could put in 500 kilos here, select kilos, and then that 500 kilos then will be divided between these 2 paddocks. And I suppose if it's protected urea, it'd be 375. Then I suppose a lot of farmers would be still using bags per acre. For example, so if we were spreading 1/2 a bag of protected urea, it would be 25 kilos of protected urea per acre. And then similarly, then with the amount per hectare, 1/2 a bag would be about 65 kilos of product of protected urea per hectare. And I suppose again, a lot of farmers as well like units. So the simple one then would be if we're spreading 1/2 a bag of protected urea, which contains 46% here nitrogen, we can just put in 23 units. So I suppose if we just go with 23 units of protected urea, click on save, and those 2 records then are saved in the database. I suppose all records then are converted to kilograms per hectare. So you can see our 23 units of nitrogen has increased to 28 kilos per hectare. So very similarly as well with slurry, if we go in, add another record, this time we'll pick just the third paddock. We can go down here to C for cattle slurry maybe. And you can see there's a lot of different combinations. You can see there's spring dribble bar dilute, spring injected, spring splash plate, etc. So if we just click on dilute, again, probably amount per acre. So if we're going for 2,000 gallons per acre, select gallons and select save. And again, that's saved in there, and that's the record gone in. So again, it's pretty simple. I suppose select your paddock, select your fertilizer type, and the amount that you want to apply. Then I suppose after entering all the records, I suppose the thing to keep an eye on then, I suppose, is the paddock summary report here to see how much NP and K are put out on the different paddocks. So I suppose, again, this is probably, there isn't much information in here for 2021 yet. So if we just change the date, apply the filter, and you can see here then that we get a breakdown of the total N, total P, total K, total S in kilograms per hectare, all down along. And if we scroll down the bottom then, we get an average for the farm. So in 2020, this particular farm spread about 226 kilos of N, 54 of P, figure looks a bit high, 235 and 20 kilos of sulfur. So I suppose there is the apply filter here. You can put in any date you want, and I suppose you can get the information. Another point is that all these values, they include slurry and chemical fertilizer. So you can change the different types here. So if we only wanted to look at artificial fertilizer, and then just apply the filter, and we'll just get the artificial value. So that's definitely one thing there to watch out for. Then again, if we go back to our menu, if we go into the farm summary, this will show you, I suppose, the products that were applied on the farm. So if we go again, change it to 2020, we can see that there was 10-10-20, 18-6-12, different combinations of protected urea, slurry, and even down the bottom here, there's lime as well. And I suppose it'll give you the total amount of product that was purchased and applied onto the farm. So again, it's a bit of an inventory there of what fertilizer went out or slurry, whatever the case may be. So again, that is the farm summary. And then I suppose the final report then would be the application summary here. So again, this just gives a breakdown of what and when was it applied. So if you were looking for a particular paddock, see how many applications a paddock got in that particular year, you can just simply click on the paddock heading here, and it'll sort them. So you can see here paddock A down along, and if we go down here, we can see what paddock 4-5 got, and the number of applications, the amount of slurry it got, etc. And if you want to, you can also select the paddock. So if you just wanted one particular paddock, apply the filter here again, and it'll pull up the one paddock for you. Again, if you wanted to just look at fertilizer or slurry, you can change the filter, change your type. So I suppose there is a good bit of flexibility there in that report. And again, all reports, you can export them there to PDF or Excel. So I suppose there is great, good flexibility there. Just then, I suppose, just soil test results, just to touch on those. You can see here, you can just add your soil test report, pretty simple. But we're also, I suppose, linked with FBA laboratories in Cappoquin. So you can click here and manage your link, and then you will be able to get your results uploaded automatically. There's a soil test report there as well, which compares, I suppose, your soil fertility, the amount of fertilizer that you applied, and the amount of grass grown in each paddock. So I suppose that is kind of, I suppose, a report that ties it all together, and like what Kevin is doing there, trying to put a plan together for 2021. So now I suppose I'll just try to move over here now to the app. So I'll just stop sharing here. 2 seconds there now. Stop share. And hopefully this fella should work. Screen. Start broadcast. So we'll just have a look at the PastureBase Ireland app. So I'm actually logged in here to Kevin's farm.
Perfect. You can
so
see
you can
very
see
clearly there,
Fertiliser
Micheal,
there, which is the third. Fertiliser is the third button here down in the middle of the screen. So if we hit Fertiliser, you can just see the last application on the farm. So paddock, a lot of slurry went out there in October for the different paddocks. If we look at the report, this again just shows the amount of fertiliser applied year to date. So again, 2021 is only after starting. So there is no fertiliser applied yet on the farm. So that'll be filling up. If we click on back, we go into the soil fertility report. Again, that we can see the soil fertility for each paddock. You can also see at the top here, it says tap on any item to pre-order the list. So if I wanted to bring up the low K paddocks, I just click on K and it re-ranks them. If I click on PH, it re-ranks them as well. So I suppose there is a lot of flexibility there on that report as well. And then finally, I suppose the main thing is, is to get familiar with recording the fertiliser. So if we click on add new here up the top left-hand corner, click on select paddocks. I want to apply fertiliser on paddock 4, 5 and 6. Click done. That equates to nearly 15.5 hectares. And then if I just apply, if we just scroll all the way down the bottom here again, and we just go with, urea, for example. Again, very similar to what we went through already, 23 units. And we click on save. Those records in are put in there for 4, 5 and 6. And then just finally, Joe, I suppose, when you have your fertiliser records put in, down the bottom of the screen here, you just click on synchronize, and the information leaves your phone and comes up in the website. So I suppose it's a good opportunity then to go into PastureBase, run a couple of reports and to see where you are as regards your fertiliser application. And maybe just one final thing as well, I suppose we're here now the middle of January. It might be a good time to do an opening cover. There seems to be a lot of grass out there at the moment. And I suppose before cows start to calve, it'll be a good opportunity to see how much grass is on the farm. And again, use other tools like the spring rotation planner, the grass budget, etc. And if you have any questions, to contact the service desk. So I'll leave it back to you, Joe.
Perfect, Micheal. Thanks a million for that. I think it's just maybe important to anyone that joined us late as well tonight that, you know, this webinar is being recorded. So if there's something you want to, maybe something that Micheal went through that you want to look back on in the next couple of days, it will be up on the Grass 10 page on the Teagasc public website. There's a drop-down menu on the left-hand side, and the recording will be in there under webinars. Okay.
Just one thing to say there, just when we were talking about protected urea, I suppose, just in terms of the weight to bag, just for people maybe who aren't used to urea or protected urea, there is 375 kilos in a big bag of protected urea, where versus the other, canned products are half a ton. So just in case people are wondering or not used to it, just to clarify that there, yeah.
Perfect stuff. Is there any other questions there, John?
There's an awful lot of questions in. I'm trying to type as quick as I can here, answering some of them. There's one or two, Kevin, I might put them to you, just in terms of there's a lot of questions on the clover. One was on the high clover content swards, is that going to affect your opening farm cover? So it's on 25% of the farm. Has it affected your opening farm cover? I know you did a walk this week. Are you happy enough with where it is, Kevin?
Yeah, it was. I won't lie, it was definitely one of my biggest concerns, John. When I went doing it. But I'd have to say I haven't done a farm cover there now on Monday? Not massively, no. Small bit more open, but not to the degree that you would say it's a problem. You know, the pros still far outweigh the cons.
Good. And how did you get the clover established, Kevin? That's the other question then. Just quickly, what did you do?
Yes, so I suppose really quickly, through two ways. First way was putting it in the reseed, which I found very effective, and it does last, provided that the pH and the P and the K are right. It doesn't like any degree of poaching, I found. You know, if you do hammer it, the clover will disappear. The second approach then is incorporating it into the existing sward with an ironbark after grazing. And this way I found to be, it is good, but it's a bit more unforgiving. So you have to have everything right. And the big thing I found, maybe the big mistake I made last year, John, was I tried to do too much together. And one of the biggest, I suppose, things that will determine how successful it is your pre-grazing yield after you incorporate the clover in. So you do need sunlight always getting at the soil. And so if you do too much together, you have too many paddocks coming at you. You have to graze it at 1,000 or 1,100. And by trying to do too much together, you have too many paddocks coming at you at 1,000, and you can't get them all grazed at 1,000. And so some of them will run into higher covers, and the clover just won't survive.
Yeah. And then that's grand, Kevin. And you've no problem with bloat. There's one quick question there on bloat. How do you manage that, or how do you reduce that risk?
Yeah, again, not an issue. And strip wires is really what I'm using, and I have the water system in that I can use bloat oil if needs be. I haven't had to use bloat oil yet, but I suppose the big thing is, John, this year really will be the telling point, because you know the clover content wasn't massive up until now. You know.
Yeah. That's grand, Kevin. Thanks very much for your time. And David, I have a couple of questions there for you. And maybe you could just clarify this, David, because there's a question in here. Would it be beneficial to make protected urea compulsory rather than, I suppose, having to reduce fertilizer, reduce, we say the urea in can? Would it not be better off just to make everyone use protected urea? I think there's a bit of clarifying there.
Yeah, look at the reason, I suppose, or the main reason for protected urea is that we can keep the nitrogen on the ground in a urea farm. So that's the benefit over ordinary urea. And the benefit over can is it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So together, the two of them solve our ammonia issue, which is potentially a new quota, if you want to think about it that way. And if we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then protected urea hits those two areas. The question over compulsory, currently the amount of protected urea used nationally is being counted. So it's being counted from the manufacturer. So once it leaves the manufacturers, it's counted at a national level. If the levels don't go up, then there'll be more nitrogen cuts. So if the levels of use don't go up, then we're going to run into problems in terms of reaching our ammonia targets, and then the pressure comes back on the cow or on the stocking rates. So it's either, I suppose it's in farmers' own interest to move over. Obviously that takes a little bit of time. The science is there to back it now. There's plenty of studies to prove that it does what it says on the tin, number one, but it also doesn't compromise in terms of yield using a urea-based nitrogen all year round with the protection on it. So it is in farmers' own interest to use more and more of it. Obviously, guys are still testing the water with it at the moment, but if we don't get mass use over the next couple of years, then the pressure is certainly going to come back on stocking rates or on total nitrogen headline figures. So making it compulsory is the last, I suppose, should be the last option to almost have the regulator saving farmers from themselves almost in terms of not using it. I would say, test it, take out, at least this year, get a pallet of it. if that's all you were to start with this year, if you haven't used it before, test it on a field on your farm and see how you get on, and then look at your decision after that. But in all the research that we have done, there's research there at Moore Park, there's research in Johnstown Castle, we've done it in the north as well, up in Athby, and it does what it says on the tin. It doesn't have a compromise in terms of yield, and actually nitrogen uptake is higher with it. So we recover more of the nitrogen, so it's more efficient than the other two fertilizers. So I suppose, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. Yeah. Just one question there. Just about, I suppose, aerating slurry. There's things in sheds for keeping the slurry, I suppose, aerated that doesn't require agitation and things, David. Is that reducing nitrogen in the slurry?
Potentially, John, yeah. So if slurry is in the tank and it doesn't have a crust on it, there's potentially more emissions of ammonical nitrogen. So all the majority of nitrogen in slurry is in an ammonia form. So if we think about a bag of can, 50% of the nitrogen is ammonia and 50% is nitrate. So all of slurry is in an ammonical form, and the crust actually saves the emission out of the tank. So if we're aerating with a bubble system, that reduces the crust and potentially increases the emissions. So you're losing nitrogen. Now, that needs to be weighed up. A lot of those systems were brought in to be more nimble in terms of not needing agitation. And there's also a health and safety issue there in terms of, hydrogen sulfide doesn't build up because you don't need to agitate it that way. So that needs to be, I don't mean to be dismissive of the aeration system, but it's something that probably needs a little bit more consideration going forward.
Okay. That's all right. And I suppose, David, there was a question, one or two questions in earlier on, I suppose. Just look on the early spring nitrogen slide, on drier farms that are reseeded, good soil fertility, they're going to give a good response to fertilizer, even applied, late January, early February. So that, it's still about getting, there's good recovery of nitrogen on those swards. It's maybe the heavier ground that might have to wait until it's suitable conditions, maybe later in February, early March to go.
So what I'd say to that, John, is, that's correct. If you have a good reseeded sward with good soil fertility, it will give a better response. The only thing then that you have to consider beyond that is temperature is the main factor, and moisture in the soil is the other one. So if the moisture is too high, the temperature can't increase and there's not enough air in there to kick off grass growth. And we need to achieve that temperature of 5.5 or above is kind of where grass begins to kick off. So there's no point in having it out before soils have dried up enough to let that warmer air on these days get into the soil to help things kick off. And
I suppose the average response to early spring nitrogen across farms is about 10 kilos of dry matter of grass. So, on a farm that's putting out 30 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, which is about half a bag of protected urea, you're going to get an extra 300 kilos of grass, which if you're stocked to 2.5 is about 10 days worth of feeding for animals. So, when every day of grass is worth $2.70 per cow, it's a great benefit to get cows out. And again, there's less slurry with that as well. So,
and look, John, that's it in a nutshell. I suppose the economics stack up. Farmers mightn't like to hear it, but nitrogen is relatively cheap compared with grass, so it makes economic sense to do it. In this new era now, and being ready and being more resilient in terms of your farm business, and it's a bit like going to the bank manager and looking for a loan. In terms of the system going forward, we need to be resilient to these potential reductions in nitrogen fertilizer. So economics needs to be driven with a little bit of an eye on the environment in terms of, it might make economic sense to do it, but we also need to be sure that while it makes economic sense for the farm, it also makes environmental sense. And it could be that you throttle back by 5 units here or there, as you've talked about 6 units over the over a number of rounds amounts to a lot of nitrogen at the end of the year, and it can be gotten that way. So what I would say is keep it between the ditches, so to speak. Don't over egg the early nitrogen, but put out enough where you're going to get a response, and maybe hold off for a couple of weeks on the other ones.
All right, yeah. Is that all right, lads? Do you want to wrap it up, Joe? Or have you any questions, Micheal? Or?
I just want to run on there, John. Just we have one or two things to get to just before we finish. That's all right.
Yeah.
If there's no other questions there, just work for me here. So yeah, so I suppose if there's no other question, just one or two things coming up. We're on the home straight, anyways. I suppose. So just with the Grassland Farmer of the Year competition. So next Tuesday, the 19th of January at 2 p.m. the annual Grassland Farmer of the Year competition award ceremony will take place. I suppose the objective of the Grassland Farmer of the Year is to promote grassland excellence for all Irish livestock farmers in an environmentally sustainable manner. So look at with the year that's in it, it's moving to a virtual conference this year. So again, if you just log into the Teagasc public website there, and it'll be under the Grassland Farmer of the Year awards, you can log in there to view the award ceremony next week. Also, just we're hoping to have a webinar once a month now over the next few months up until the middle of the summer. We have the next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, the 4th of February, again at 7 p.m. And it's really to get people familiar with using PastureBase Ireland. So maybe people starting out on their pasture-based journey, or maybe people that are measuring the last year or two, and they're just maybe there's a few things that they're not fully sure of, maybe using the app, or just a couple of things they need clarified. So again, same thing, register for it on the night, and we'll try and go through as many things as we can in the hour and 10 minutes. So I suppose quickly to summarize, I think David, look at you framed the discussion really well at the start, asking farmers, are they prepared for 20% lower nitrogen? I think, essentially what a lot of farmers are going to, have to seriously think about is, can I keep the same stock numbers with 20% less nitrogen, or whatever frame it comes in down the line? And, what would be crucial going forward, straight away there is soil fertility. Like, we spent a good bit of time talking about it there earlier, but it can't be emphasized enough how important it's going to be to provide the ideal conditions for grass growth. Very, 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 similar to what we talked about at the last webinar as well. If we use PastureBase to input fertilizer applied and the soil sample results, coupled, say, with 35, 40 grass walks a year, we have a phenomenal amount of data built up on PastureBase. And, as Kevin said earlier, we can sit down at the end of the year, and whether it's, with an advisor or whoever it is, sit down, review the previous year, review the previous few years, and make a plan for the next year, for the coming years. This isn't an overnight thing. This is the thing about building up the data over a number of years and improving as we go along. I think as well, we've tried to keep things as simple as possible tonight in terms of going after the low hanging fruit. The 5 units, or the 6 kilos here and there. So, going after the low emission slurry spreading, as David was on about earlier, the advantage that has to bring to the table. The summer fertilizer, maybe just reducing that fertilizer a little bit, and using protected urea as we go along. And then clover, I suppose it's the buzzword at the minute. It has huge potential, with the farm to fork going forward in terms of lower chemical nitrogen going out on farms. And I suppose just to tie it all in together, the Grass 10 newsletter every week, it's available on the Teagasc social media, and on the website as well. If you're looking for further information or little tips and updates as we go out through the year, videos, few different things, have a read of it every week throughout the year. Lastly, I'd like to thank my Grass 10 colleague John Douglas and Micheal O'Leary from PastureBase Ireland for the webinar this evening. I'd also like to, hugely thank David Wall, senior researcher in Teagasc, Johnstown Castle, for the opening presentation. It was a super amount of information there on, farmers, what is potentially coming down the tracks and how we can be ahead of the game. So thanks a million, David. And lastly, look, it's always great when you have a farmer, on the line. And I suppose, Kevin, you have a huge amount of data built up on PastureBase over the last few years, and thanks a million for sharing it with us tonight. We really do appreciate it. And lastly, thanks to everyone for tuning in to us, and we'd like to thank the sponsors of the Grass 10 program. So we have the Department of Agriculture, Teagasc, Farmers Journal, AIB, Grassland Agro, and FBD. And we'd like to wish you the best of luck into the new year, and we'll hope to see you on the webinar on the 4th of February. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, lads. I suppose we'll have the questions up, Joe. We'll post them link them with the newsletter next week, and we'll get them out on social media as well. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks,
okay, lads.
Thanks, lads.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.